Did everybody have a good weekend? Enjoy yourself, chill a little bit? I think you probably have noticed I posted an October 2nd date for everything to be in, and I will be opening up the unit exam, and you'll have a week to do it or more. But everything, all assignments, all quizzes, everything has to be completed by October the 2nd. So that gives you a little over 2 weeks. Well, right at 2 weeks. And so we're getting very, very close to getting this unit finished. I probably will not open it up until we absolutely finish it, and I'll give you 2 weeks after that. So right now, for what we've got open, go ahead and shoot for 2 weeks. I mean, shoot for October 2nd, and hopefully we can be through by then. Okay. Any questions? Okay. We've been talking about Freud. We've talked about his theory of the structure of the mind, and we've talked about he was the one that developed free association. Put a lot of emphasis on dreams. He also gave us the psychosexual model, developmental model. So we've talked about all those things. Today we're going to talk about what's called defense mechanisms. Now, defense mechanisms, he says, these are behaviors and mental responses that come about when you come across an experience or an event that causes you to feel very anxious or painful or guilt-ridden or threatened. Any of these can cause a defense mechanism, according to Freud. Now, his number one defense mechanism, so much of his theory, so much of his ideas revolve around this defense mechanism. It's the granddaddy of them all. It's more important than any other defense mechanism. And that defense mechanism is called repression. Now, let me get my little clicker here. I knew I was forgetting something. Repression is involuntary. You don't do it on purpose. It's automatic. You don't know that you do it. It's unconscious. You have no idea that you've done it. And it is an unconscious blocking of a threatening or painful thought, idea, or memory. Now, let's put it in terms where something has happened and it was so painful for the brain to go through the first time, it says, I don't want to have to ever go through that again. I'm going to push it down as far as I can so that it doesn't come up and that I'll think about it again. So it is an unconscious way the brain tries to avoid thinking about something. Okay? So it's involuntary, automatic, unconscious. I had a patient one time that had severe scarring on her arms, and she had been in a fire, and she didn't remember hardly anything about the fire, and yet she had articles that she kept in her purse about the fire, and she had spent time in the children's ward over at the hospital. She didn't remember because it was so painful. You see this a lot with a traumatic event, like say a woman has, or a person has had severe trauma or sexual abuse as a child, and they don't remember details or they may not even remember the incident. Now, repression is very controversial. There are psychologists who say there's no such thing. And then there are psychologists that say, yes, we totally believe in it. And it really has nothing to do with whether they're a Freudian or not. You know, I'm not a Freudian. I totally believe in repression.
Do they need to know, like, word?
Do what?
The ones who don't believe, they need to know word?
They just, I don't know how they explain it, but they just don't believe in it. So, repression is involuntary, it's automatic, and it's unconscious. It's an unconscious blocking of a threatening or painful thought, idea, or memory. Very closely related to repression is a defense mechanism called suppression. Suppression. Now, suppression is voluntary. They know they're doing it. It is conscious. It is a denial of reality. It is a voluntary blocking of reality. And it is not the same as repression. You can see that it's not the same. Repression is involuntary, suppression is voluntary. Repression is unconscious, suppression is conscious. Okay? Now, a very good example of suppression is, let's say that, and I'm not going to identify the person, of course, but the individual's mother died. And the sister of the person was working through her grief in a very positive way, talking about the painful memories, working through the pain, journaling, and she would do things, you know, like, oh, there's Mom's coffee cup. She really loved her coffee, didn't she? And she would just make little comments like that that would help her. Well, one day her brother said, I've had enough of this. I do not want you to do this anymore. I choose to think that Mother has not died, she's just on vacation. I choose to believe that she's on a cruise and one day she'll come walking through that door. I don't want to believe that she's dead. And every time you mention a nice little memory or you talk about something with Mother, it makes me remember that she's not coming back, and I don't want that. And so I choose to believe that she's just on vacation and that I don't have to deal with the pain. Now that's suppression. And listen to that word over and over again. I choose, I choose, I choose. And the denial of reality. I choose to believe she's not dead, she's just on vacation. See? So that's suppression. That's suppression. I don't want to believe it. Don't talk to me about it. Don't mention anything about it, because if you do, it'll stir up my pain. And so I'm walking away from that and choosing to believe something else and choosing to ignore this so that I don't have to go through the pain. See? Repression, suppression. We've got another one called projection. Now, projection, here is where you see something, you got something that you're experiencing yourself, but you don't recognize that it is in yourself. You see it in somebody else. I think basically it's kind of the same thing as flipping the script. Okay? Now, let's say that I've had a really bad day at work. My boss has been on me all day long. just nipping at my heels and ragging on me for every little bitty nitpicky thing. Finally, I get off from work and I'm angry because I can't say anything to my boss because he's been firing people, he's been laying people off, and I can't afford to lose that paycheck. So I just suck it up. Now, I'm really, really angry. I go to Kroger's and I go to check out and I look at this poor cashier and I said, well, what's your problem? What's your problem? I don't know why you're so angry. Now, I'm not the one that's angry. She's the one. She's the one that's got the attitude. I don't. And so, go on and relate as if this person has the anger, and I'm just an innocent bystander. Okay? They say it's kind of like you're the projector and they're the screen. You're projecting your emotions on them. Okay?
I used to wear like narrow. I think narrow.
Narrow?
Narrow.
Oh yeah, they're like a mirror. Yeah. Then you've got regression. Now, regression is reverting to a behavior that you used to have, but you outgrew. And because something has stressed you out, or all of a sudden something very painful or threatening, without your knowledge, you go back to that behavior to help you cope. Okay? Now, let's say that there's this young girl and she's never really been away from home before, and she marries a serviceman, and they get transferred up to, Backstick Alley in North Dakota, way up there. No, not too many people around her, and he has to go on TDY, and a thunderstorm comes up. Now, she doesn't like thunderstorms, and all of a sudden, all these thunderclaps are hitting, close to her and such. And she picks up her blanket, and she hugs her blanket, and she might even start sucking on her blanket a little bit, because that's what she used to do when she was scared as a kid. See, that's the way that little blanket used to be a form of security for her when she was a child. And so now she's scared. She doesn't even think about it. She just grabs that blanket, bundles it up, starts hugging on it, and clinging to it for security. See, that's regression. She's reverting to a behavior that she used to use to cope, and she's gone back to it. I used to use a different example, but I'll do it some other day. Reaction formation. Now this one's kind of confusing, and this one is sometimes a little hard to understand. The definition says a reaction formation is one of the odder defense mechanisms, as it entails behaving completely contrary to how one truly feels. Okay? So, let's say that let's say that a person has been raised in a very religious atmosphere, and one of the things they were taught was that everything about pornography is bad. Okay? So, his roommate happens to have some pornography that he sees, and he's kind of interested in it, but he knows that he's not supposed to do that. And there's something about it that's pulling him, But, you know, he doesn't want anybody to think that he has any attraction to pornography. So he goes out and joins the anti-pornography club at school to show everybody that he doesn't approve of pornography. Another thing that was horrible, was deplorable, was despicable. When I was in high school, one of the ways that the boys proved their virility and proved how manly they were was they'd go out and they'd beat up on somebody, especially if it was a homosexual. They'd beat them up to show how manly they are, or they were. Okay? So they're doing something opposite to the way they feel, and you know, I have to wonder why it was so important for them to prove how manly they were. And so, using that logic, that they may have felt some things and had to prove they weren't by acting differently, beating somebody up. Okay? Denial. Didn't even know I'm lying. This is when somebody uses a significant effort to convince you that something doesn't exist when it does. Okay? So, I can't possibly be an alcoholic because I don't drink the hard stuff. Okay? I'm not an alcoholic because I only drink after 6 o'clock. And so they're going to give you reasons to convince you that this isn't true. I'm not a drug addict because I don't use needles. Okay? So they're going to say something to try to convince you that something isn't so, when it is. They say denial is the #1 killer of alcoholics and drug addicts because they even convince themselves. They even convince themselves that this doesn't exist. Okay? And many, many times that denial is within themselves. You know, I can't be an alcoholic. I don't wake up under the viaducts with a bottle of wine. Okay? Now, these kind of seem absurd, but I've heard every one of those in counseling. I've had every one of those where somebody was trying to convince me they were not an alcoholic. And it ended up that they were, you know. Then you have one that's very closely related called rationalization. Now here, this is wrong. It's not finding an excuse for a behavior, it's finding a justification. It's, you know, that word excuse is used incorrectly there. This is a justification. All right, yeah, I know I drink too much, but if you had a nagging spouse like I do, you drink too. I know that I drink a lot. You know, I drink a lot of wine, but my job makes my back hurt so much, and I need some wine to help my back ease up and not be so painful.
But they go back to like mirroring and acting off.
Do what?
They go back to mirroring.
Not really. Not really. This is when they are justifying. You know, if you had a job like mine, you drink too, or you used to. It's not my fault that I'm an addict. I was raised in a family of addicts. See? So they admit the behavior, but they give you a justification for it. That's rationalization. Displacement is finding a safe target for your feelings. Okay? So here, let's go back to the example where, the boss has been ragging on this guy all day long. The guy's tired, the guy is really angry because of, he's had a bad day. So he goes home and he opens the car door and he steps down and he steps on a child's toy. And he said, I've told that kid over and over again not to leave his toys in the driveway. I've told him what to do with his toy. Well, I tell you what I'm going to do with this toy. I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of it. Now, his anger has been displaced on that toy and the child. See, he doesn't realize that what he's doing is taking that anger, all that anger that he has toward that employer, and directing it to something or somebody else. Many times, when you have displacement, the things a person will say, especially in anger, are things they wanted to say to the person that they're angry at. And so, again, they're taking that anger that they feel toward one person and shooting that anger or pouring that anger on somebody else. Now, sublimation. Now this one's kind of interesting. This is an unacceptable, unconscious urge that's channeled into an unacceptable behavior. Okay? Now, I know I'm on tape, film, and I'm giving a disclosure and disclaimer right now. I am not disrespecting anybody in the meat industry, okay? This is not meant to disrespect anybody. This is just an example off the top of my head. Let's say that somebody really, really, really enjoys feeling a knife going through flesh. They just really, really love the feel of that going through that muscle and tissue. Now, instead of becoming a serial killer, they become a butcher. And they take that unacceptable urge and they put it into a socially acceptable channel. Okay? So instead of going out and hurting somebody by slashing them, he's putting it into a profession where he's getting paid to do the thing there that gives him pleasure. Okay? In my world, Mike Tyson probably got into a lot of fights when he was a child. And in my world, he probably got into a lot of fights in grade school. And he probably got into a lot of fights in middle school, and he probably got into a lot of fights in high school. But just for the sake of illustration, let's say that in high school, a coach noticed this. And he went to Tyson and he said, Mike, you have got some real talent. Now, you've got real talent, but you've got a lot of anger. And you're getting this anger out by beating people up. Why don't we put you in the boxing ring? Okay? Now, he agrees. He starts working out, going into the boxing ring, and he's having success because he's pounding people. And now he becomes the city champion. Then he becomes the regional champion. He becomes the state champion, regional champion. And he goes to the Olympics and he wins a medal. And they come up to him and they say, Mike, you need to go pro. And so he goes pro and he becomes world champion. And he loves this fighting, and he pounds people, and he pounds people, and he gets in the ring, and he fights, and he goes at it, and he rips off the ears, and he just really, really, in that ring, all those unconscious urges, all that anger and everything they're paying him. It's socially acceptable. They're paying him, but if that coach had not gotten a hold of him and said, Mike, you need to be in the ring, and instead Mike started going out to bars every weekend, and he got into fights, and one day he got into a fight and bit somebody's ears off, and, you know, and he would have not lasted very long because they would have arrested him for the exact same thing. See? So that's sublimation. Taking an unacceptable, unconscious urge and channeling it into something that is acceptable. Okay? Any questions? Well, the goal of Freudian therapy, the goal of Freudian psychology, to gain insight so that you are able to understand and control unconscious motivations. Now, I think I've told you, when you hear the word Freud, link it with the word unconscious. And look at here, there's the word Freud, and right next sentence, the unconscious. I'm telling you, if you will take my advice, it will pay off. So link that word Freud into, or with the word unconscious. The goal of Freudian therapy, the goal of Freudian psychology, to gain insight so that you are able to understand and control unconscious motivation. Well, Freud had a word that he came up with called transference. And this is when, as the therapy sessions progress, the patient starts seeing mannerisms or personality traits in that therapist that reminds them unconsciously of somebody. And so they try to start relating to that person as if they would relate, and relating to the therapist as if they were relating to that person. So, you've got a male therapist, and you've got a male patient, and the patient starts picking up on characteristics, and there's transference because he's starting to want to relate to the therapist as he would have his father. Now, this could be one of two things. It could be very, very good, because if he had a really, really good relationship with his dad, there'd be more trust, and it could speed up the therapy progress. If he had a bad relationship with his dad, it could really, really slow down progress. And so they'd have to work through the transference. They'd have to work through the feelings that this guy had toward his dad, and some other things before they could get back to the point that they were when the transference began. Okay? Transference. Then Freud said, well, you know, not only is there transference, but there's countertransference. This is when the therapist starts picking up on characteristics of the patient and starts relating to the patient as somebody from their past. Very bad. Very, very bad. This can get therapists into trouble, especially if it was a romantic person in the past, because that could very well lead to some unethical behavior. At the very least, the therapist would not be as professional and effective as he normally would. Okay? So, if I got a call from a guy that's 6'2", looks just like Tom Selleck did in Magnum P.I., and Tom Selleck is the guy who plays Frank Reagan on Blue Bloods. And a long time ago, he played a real hunk called Magnum P.I. And he comes in and sits down, and I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, I go through about $30,000 worth of crystal meth in a year, and I go through a lot more than that with marijuana, and I'm an alcoholic as well. If I had any sense whatsoever, I would say I would love to work with you, but it's probably better if I find somebody and refer you out, because that's a perfect description of my ex-fiancé. Now, I'm married, I love my husband dearly. Do I think that would lead to an inappropriate relationship? No. But it could lead to me not challenging him as firmly as I might in a regular situation with substance abusers. Confronting them might give them too much slack, because I was engaged before I was a therapist, and I had those behaviors before I was a therapist, and it would be terrible if I slipped back into that kind of a mindset. So there's all kinds of reasons it would be good for me to refer him out and not see him. Okay. Well, then the last thing is called resistance. You would think resistance would not take place, because let's just look at it financially for a minute. If you've got a person who's paying, say, $250 an hour 2 to 3 times a week to a therapist, that's anywhere from $500 to $750 a week times 4 weeks. You would think that they would not want to stymie or cause any kind of slowing down of the therapeutic process, and yet unconsciously they will do this. When you start getting very, very close to the pain, very, very close to the core of the problem, resistance will go up, because think about it. So much of their lives, they have been protecting themselves from feeling that pain. And so as you're getting closer, they're going to start feeling more uncomfortable. Now, there's several ways resistance is displayed. One way is calling up and canceling the appointment and never coming back. Another way is calling up and rescheduling an appointment. And sometimes they'll do that several times in a row before they'll come back. Another way is to divert the session. Guy comes in, and the therapist says, well, we were talking about your dad last week. I think that'd be a really, really good place to start. And the guy says, I know we were talking about Dad last week, but there's some things that really happened this week. I'd much rather address those, because I think those are more urgent, and we can get back to Dad later. See, he's trying to take over the control of the session and divert from this subject that's causing him so much pain to something else. See, that's resistance. Just saying, I don't want to talk about it. That's resistance. Probably the most severe form is picking a fight with your therapist. The guy comes in and he says, well, Doc, I'm here, and the doc says, well, we talked about your dad last week. Why don't we start talking about him right, the very first here. Talking about my dad, I cannot believe that that's all you want to talk about. I came here for depression, and here you want me to talk about my dad, and all I do is I leave angry. Well, I guess you've helped me with my depression then, because instead of being depressed, I'm angry. And yes, I am very angry. I'm so angry at you, I don't even want to look at you. I don't want to hear anything about you. In fact, I've got 2 words for you. F you. And then they march out, and then they slam the door. That's a pretty drastic form of resistance, but it happens. It does happen. Well, let's see here. I've got a little video for you. It's only about 8-9 minutes. But it's going to illustrate a lot of the things that we have been talking about with Freudian therapy or psychoanalysis. It's a little hokey, I know, but bear with me. It's got the principles there, and that's what I want you to see.
This sometimes humorous reenactment of a psychoanalytic therapy session based on an actual case effectively shows the principles of free association, transference, resistance, and dream interpretation in action.
I really don't have much to talk about today. Nothing much has happened in the last 24 hours. Work today was boring. So I really don't have much of interest to talk about.
When you left here yesterday, you seemed kind of anxious about a date you had last night.
Oh, yes. I don't know why I forgot about that. The whole reason I came to analysis was to figure out what goes wrong every time I start dating a woman. Anyway, the date last night was pretty much a bust. I felt awkward and inept. I took her to a movie, but I couldn't enjoy the movie because the whole time I was wondering about whether or not she found me interesting. She didn't say anything to me, so I kept thinking that she didn't want to have anything to do with me. Anyway, an hour into the movie, she asked if we could go because she was feeling sick. So I took her home. I felt like a complete failure. Oh, that reminds me of a dream I had last night. I was sitting in the movie theater, but for some reason it was all lit up instead of dark. The name of the film was Crimes of the Heart, which I haven't actually seen in real life. A woman sitting behind me was giggling, so I turned around and looked at her. She kind of flirted with me, so I turned back immediately. Then I noticed a man sitting about 4 or 5 seats away from me in my row. And he looked like a real slob. He was incredibly obnoxious. I noticed he was eating buttered popcorn in a messy, disgusting manner. I handed him a napkin. I don't know where I got a napkin from. But anyway, the man completely ignored me and just kept on eating. Then he noticed the woman sitting behind me, and they began to exchange flirtatious glances with each other. Finally, the man got up out of his seat and went and sat next to the woman behind me. They were giggling and carrying on and made it hard for me to hear the movie. Then an usher came up and told me that I was making too much noise and I should leave. I explained to him that it was the couple sitting behind me that was making all the noise, not me. But he didn't seem to believe me. He just kept telling me to leave. I argued with him, but he got a kiss on the foot. It looked like he was going to bash me on the ear. Then I woke up.
As you think about the dream, what comes to mind?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is pretty obvious, I guess. I think about the movie that I went to last night. In both situations, I felt pretty uncomfortable. But my date really looked nothing like the woman in the dream. I can't really say the woman in the dream reminded me of anybody. I know she was wearing glasses. Oh, I just remembered something. She was holding a white rose in her hand. I know that sounds pretty bizarre to be sitting in a fully lit movie theater carrying a white rose.
Does the white rose bring anything particular to mind?
Oh, of course. The woman I took out last night was named Rose. But like I said, she really looked nothing like the woman in the dream. Besides, the woman in the dream was sitting behind me. Wait a minute, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that you were sitting behind me, and therefore the woman in the dream must represent you. I really don't think so, though. Because like I said, she really looked nothing like you. Besides, you don't wear glasses. The only other association I have to roses goes back to my childhood. I remember my mother had a rose garden in the backyard, and she lived out there constantly. A memory just popped into my mind. I must have been only 5 or 6 years old.
This sometimes humorous reenactment of a psychoanalytic therapy session based on an actual case effectively shows the principles of free association, transference, resistance, and dream interpretation in action.
Okay, first of all, I want you to see the position of the therapist to the patient. She's behind the patient, and he can't see her. Now, one of the theories on that is that if she has any kind of reaction or facial expression to something that he has said, that could inhibit the free association. And so you want to be out of, with psychoanalysis, you want to be out of the facial plane there of the patient, because you don't want to do anything that could inhibit the free association. Now, the comical rumor is that Freud actually started this because he would sleep during the sessions, and that way he could do that and nobody would know. But actually, right here, this is a good example of the placement of the therapist. Now, when we start this up, I want you to hear how he said, well, I don't really know what to say. That's their portrayal of resistance. Now, with free association, if you noticed, she didn't say hardly anything through that session. The only time she did was when there'd be a lull, and it would be like he was about ready kind of just to poop out and not be able to think of anything else to say, and she would interject something. So watch what happens here.
I really don't have much to talk about today. Nothing much has happened in the last 24 hours. Work today was boring, so I really don't have much of interest to talk about.
When you left here yesterday, you seemed kind of anxious about a date you had last night.
Oh, yes.
See, she waited for a little bit to see if he was going to jump back in there, and he didn't, so she gave him a jump start question. And he launched from that, and then from then on, he was able to free associate. So the free association, the therapist is not supposed to be talking, not supposed to be asking questions, not supposed to be interjecting or analyzing. He's supposed to have that entire time to just be able to free think and to go ahead and just say whatever comes to his mind. Do I have any questions about Freud? Because we're done. We're done with Freud, which is kind of sad. I mean, even though I don't agree with much of that he has said, I think that he had some strokes of brilliance, and I completely agree with a couple of things. I completely agree that there are defense mechanisms, but I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist, and MFTs are not supposed to believe in defense mechanisms, and yet I embrace them. See, and so that, I was telling you earlier, that when you study psychology, you don't have to just say, I'm just going to stick with this one, or everything that everybody says is true. you can decide. You can decide what you think is logical, what you think is real, and you can reject. The next one we're going to talk about is cognitive therapy. Now, the best thing here, they want to understand the underlying causes of thought processes. The underlying causes of thought processes. And remember, cognitive therapy, the root is structuralism. Well, one of the definitions, the main concern of cognitive psychology is how information is received from our senses and processed by the brain, and how this processing directs how we behave. But, again, look at here. How and how and how. They want to know how things happen. They want to know the underlying causes of thought processes. Cognitive psychology is one of the newer forms per se. I mean, when you've got psychoanalysis that started in the late 1800s, and you've got behavioralism that came in the 1920s, when you've got something that emerges in the 1960s, they're kind of the new kid on the block. Now, it did not become a major area of interest until the 1960s, and basically what they say is that you can choose your life or you can change your life by choosing your thoughts. You are what you think. Your thoughts control your emotions. So your body reacts to your positive and negative thoughts. And Dr. Ellis, he gave us rational emotive behavioral therapy. He said that this form of therapy helps to eliminate irrational, self-defeating thoughts and replace them with healthy thoughts. Okay? Now, cognitive therapy is a popular type of therapy, and they have blended it now with other therapies and other approaches, so that it may not, you may not find somebody who just does 100% cognitive therapy. Okay? You can change your life by choosing your thoughts. So, between the 1920s and 1960s, the cognitive perspective was not part of mainstream psychology. The cognitive approach focuses on how we use our thinking, knowledge, and information to structure and to understand our world. Now, in a minute, we're going to talk about a psychologist named Albert Ellis. Ellis was a very important figure in psychology, but he uses a term called irrational thinking. Now, when we talk about irrational thinking in reference to rational emotive behavioral therapy, or Ellis, we're talking about self-defeating thinking, negative thinking, self-destructive thinking. We're not talking about bizarre thinking like a schizophrenic or somebody that has some severe problems. It's just a different way that Ellis used the word. Cognitive psychology is also concerned with the field of memory, and again, how information is stored and organized. In 1960, Miller and Bruner established the Center for Cognitive Studies, and in 1967, Cognitive Psychology was published. John Piaget initially studied intellectual development in children. He's well respected in developmental psychology, but he developed a theory with 4 stages of cognitive development. Piaget and that theory is still influential. Cognitive approach, well, honestly, when we're talking about the cognitive approach, the more, the one that really is practiced cognitive, was Beck, okay? Now, I'll tell you why. All right. Let's say that this is cognitive psychology. Let's say that somebody thinks that this is the be-all, end-all approach to psychology. That it just really nails it. That there is not one thing wrong with the theory and the approach. And so they're 100% committed to it. They discard anything else from any other approach. They're called a purist. Okay? Now, let's say that you've got somebody that says, okay, I really like cognitive, and I really like behavioral. Cognitive has a lot of stuff on the ball, and I agree with cognitive, but I don't agree with everything. And behavioral is phenomenal. So I think that I will take stuff from cognitive and take stuff from behavioral and blend it. Now, this is called an eclectic approach. Eclectic approach. When you blend two or more approaches together, it's eclectic. If you only subscribe to one, then it's a purist approach. And so you could have two like this, or you could even have, and that's okay. But this is eclectic, and that's purist. So, in that respect, the cognitive behavioral would be considered an eclectic approach. And Beck would not be considered a purist. But we're going to talk about Ellis anyway. Ellis is not a purist, Beck is. Albert Ellis is an incredible therapist. There's 2 or 3 therapists that I just really think nailed it. And Ellis, in many ways, changed my life after I started studying him. His approach came about, well, actually, he was originally trained as a Freudian therapist, a psychoanalytical doctor, okay? And he got out there in the real world, he said, I don't think this really, I just don't agree with some of this. So he just went out and started his own. Now, he lived from 1913 to 2007, about, I think he was like 96 years old. And he was still on the lecture circuit right up until his death. Deaf as a post toward the last years. When he was a young man, he was very shy. He used his therapy approach on himself and overcame his shyness toward women. And in his latter years, when he would go to a conference, the word would go out to the women therapists to be on the lookout because the womanizer had made the scene. And he had quite a reputation of being a church skirt chaser. He said the key to having healthy thinking is to think rationally and logically. You got to think rationally and logically. And he said you feel the way you think. You feel the way you think. Now, I had a patient, and she came in one day, and she was depressed. And I said, what's going on? Well, I'm depressed as usual. Okay. Well, this lady, we had tried different forms of therapy on her. The doctor tried different medications, and she was not really compliant with medications. She just had given up, and basically, I don't know why she came unless she just wanted the contact, because she wouldn't do anything that we told her. And so, I said, well, what have you done that might help you feel better? Well, all I do is just sit at home. Got to the point that I honestly did not know what else to do. I had tried everything. I talked to other therapists, and they said, try this, try that. I tried everything I knew. And one day she came in, and I said, well, how you feeling today? And she goes, crappy as usual. And for the life of me, I don't know why I asked this, but I said, when you wake up in the morning, what is the first thing you think? Now, for me, that would be a pretty hard question. And she said, that's the easiest thing you've ever asked me. She goes, I think the same thing every morning. As soon as I wake up, open my eyes up, I think, well, what kind of, another word for crap, what kind of crappy day am I going to have today? Now, there's a thing called self-fulfilling prophecy. And if you wake up and you start thinking it's going to be a crappy day, you're going to start looking for things to validate that thought. Well, I told her what I wanted her to do was I wanted her to think of 5 things before she got out of bed that she was thankful for. 5 things that was good in her life. And her response is, I don't have 5 things. And I said, well, let's just see if we can't kind of jumpstart you here. I said, did you have supper last night? And she said, yeah. I said, was it good? And she goes, oh yeah. I said, what did you have? And she rattled it off. Sounded wonderful. And I said, that is something to be really thankful for, because how many millions of people last night did not eat supper? How many million people last night went to bed hungry? Well, I hadn't thought about that. I said, well, it's something to be thankful for. I said, when you went to bed last night, did you have a bed to go to? And she said, well, yeah. I said, how many people are sleeping on the ground or sleeping in cardboard boxes? Well, I hadn't thought about that either. So you have a bed. That's something to be thankful for. I said, did you sleep in a house and the roof didn't leak last night? I said, it rained last night. And she goes, no, there weren't any leaks. So you were dry. You were warm. Sounds to me like another thing to be thankful for. How'd you get here? Well, I drove. How many people don't have a car? How many people would have had to walk? And so we talked about just basic things. I had to get down to the very basic level. And we started talking about that. And so the next week she comes in and no change. Absolutely no. Another crappy day. And I said, have you done your homework? And she said, what homework? And I said, you were supposed to be finding 5 things to be thankful for every day. Oh, I thought that was just to be done in the office. And I said, no, it was supposed to be done every day. Okay, and so we worked on it some more that day. The next week she came. The secretary called her and had her come back, and she was walking down the hall, and I always walked up to greet them. And I walked past her, I said, excuse me for a minute, excuse me. And I was looking, I thought, her whole appearance and demeanor was so different, I did not recognize her. Every week she came in with the same outfit, black pants, a black shirt, a black top coat, a black toboggan, black gloves, black shoes, black socks, and always just kind of like this. And this time she had on some bright colored slacks with a flowery shirt. Her hair was done, it didn't have a toboggan. She had makeup on, and I didn't realize, didn't recognize you. And she said, well, I just thought I'd do something different. And so she sat down and said, well, how's your week going? She goes, it's been different. She goes, I felt different. And I said, well, now, what's different between this week and last week? And she said, I don't know anything different per se. It's just, I just feel different. And I said, did you do your homework? And she goes, oh yeah, I've been finding all kinds of things to be thankful for. Now, first of all, I don't want this to come off like a magic bullet. And that's the cure for all depression. It wasn't. It was a cure to try and get her from being so far down, and to see that there was hope, and to launch from that. But no, I mean, that's not a end-all cure. But the thing that brings me back here, you feel the way you think. She got up every morning thinking this is going to be a really crappy day. And sure enough, she felt the way she thought. And she felt crappy, and she looked for crappy things to validate that she was going to have a really crappy day. So that's part of where we're going on this. Ellis was trained as a Freudian therapist. And when I saw the next quote from Ellis, I knew there was something about this man that I had to learn more about. I loved this attitude. Why should I sit and listen to a patient babble on the couch for years when I know what's wrong after one session? Now, that's really not disrespecting. It's really a very respectful statement, because he's saying, if I know how to help somebody, why should I make them free associate for years and years and years until they have an aha moment, and I have soaked them for $500 to $700 a week for 10 years, because it's pretty common to keep somebody in psychoanalysis for 10 years or longer, 2 to 3 times a week on sessions. And so we're talking anywhere from around $500 to $700 a week. So right there, you can see that basically only your higher socioeconomic people can even afford psychoanalysis. But he's saying, look, I think that it's really disrespectful if you have somebody just free associating, and they're just putting whatever they're thinking out there, when I can see what's wrong. And I can help them to identify it, and help them to learn how to overcome these kind of things when they enter their life. And I thought, this is good stuff. This is really good stuff. Well, originally, Ellis, he came up with a form of therapy called rational therapy. this was introduced about 1955. It's my understanding that, either he got to thinking about it or people got to talking to him and saying, look, this involves more than just thinking rationally and logically. You are addressing emotions. There are emotions in there that you will be dealing with. And so he thought, okay, well, maybe it's a little bit more honest if I call it rational emotive therapy. So it's been called rational therapy, rational emotive therapy, RT or RET. But then in 1999, he changed the name again to rational emotive behavioral therapy. There is a behavioral component to it. So it is an eclectic approach, okay? Here's